7 decades since the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered, around 80 new fragments of the ancient texts have been revealed to the public. Archaeologists in Israel made the monumental find.
Archaeologists have uncovered something no one expected inside a sealed cave above Galilee. A 2,000-year-old message that appears to come from Jesus himself.
Their work uncovered biblical treasures, including pieces of scrolls nearly 2,000 years old.
The writing was hidden inside a stone box and protected with unusual care, as if someone wanted it to survive no matter what happened around it. When the team read the first lines, even the experts present were shaken by what the message revealed. A land of turmoil, faith, and fear. First-century Galilee was a tense and uncertain place. Roman soldiers moved through towns with the authority to question anyone, and many families lived with a steady fear that a wrong word could bring trouble. Daily life was filled with strain. Taxes were heavy. Local leaders struggled to keep peace. New preachers and teachers appeared often, and some of them drew crowds that worried officials. According to several historians, suspicion grew whenever a teacher gained attention because Rome viewed any growing influence as a possible threat.
For they shall see God. Pray to him, and he will listen.
And how should we pray?
It was in this environment that written words felt unsafe, because once they existed, anyone could turn them into accusations. Because of these risks, many people avoided writing sensitive information. Ancient records show that communities often relied on spoken teaching instead of written notes because oral messages could not be seized or traced.
I mean, that's totally different than everything else we've ever been told before.
According to some scholars, families taught their children to repeat stories and teachings from memory so they would not need written copies that could be blamed on them. When someone did write a personal message, they protected it with extreme caution. Some scrolls were placed in jars and hidden in storerooms. Others were wrapped in cloth and buried beneath floors. Reports from past excavations suggest that these hiding practices were common in the Galilee region. Small sects and local movements also relied on secrecy. They met in private homes or in quiet open areas.
How shall we picture the kingdom of God? It is like a mustard seed.
Meetings were held at night or in locations where soldiers did not patrol. When teachings were written down, followers sometimes divided those writings into pieces and stored them separately. According to researchers, this kept the group alive but made their records fragile and scattered. Fear of raids pushed families and small groups to act in advance. They hid valuable items in deep corners of their homes. They buried letters in courtyards. They kept their most personal documents away from public view. Many believed that if a message was important, it needed to be placed where no officer could find it. These habits created a culture where secrecy was normal and often necessary. And in a landscape shaped by tension, some people chose hiding places that the world would overlook for generations. The caves that refused to forget. Many people began turning to Mount Arbel as a place to hide what they could not protect in their homes. Mount Arbel rises sharply above the Sea of Galilee, and its cliffs hold a network of caves that once served as the last refuge for people who had nowhere else to run.
While this is awesome, we came here for something else, and it's time we head there, the cliffs.
According to several historians, families and rebels escaped into these chambers when Roman patrols swept across the region. The caves offered a sense of protection because their entrances were small and often hidden from a distance. Anyone climbing toward them needed steady hands and courage. A single slip could end the escape, and the fear of being caught made every step feel heavier. Archaeologists who entered these caves centuries later began finding small reminders of the lives that passed through them. Oil lamps lay buried in the dust. Clay pots were cracked and left behind. Coins from the 1st century were scattered in corners where people once sat in silence. Each object told its own story. Some pieces looked like they were dropped during a hurried escape. Others appeared stored with care, waiting for someone who never returned to claim them. These discoveries made it clear that these were not empty holes in the mountain. They were places where real people hid, prayed, and tried to survive. The layout of the caves added to their value as hiding places. Many passages ran deep inside the mountain and twisted into tight spaces.
And this way, we will reach our destination and learn more about the history of this place.
Soldiers who tried to pursue fugitives risked being trapped or falling in darkness. There were reports from early explorers who said that the caves felt like natural fortresses. These tight passages sometimes slowed Roman patrols long enough for families to disappear into safer corners. This natural advantage made Mount Arbel one of the most feared hideouts for occupying forces. Some chambers showed signs of human alteration. According to archaeological reports, certain sections contained stone coverings that appeared intentionally placed to conceal items underneath. These were not random piles. They looked like planned hiding spots, made to protect valuables from looters or officials. This was consistent with practices seen in other parts of Judea, where people hid scrolls, jewelry, or personal records out of fear that soldiers would seize them.
And yet those concerns haven't prevented the Israeli Antiquities Authority from putting the discoveries on display.
Not all activity inside these caves was about hiding from danger. Items linked to early Jewish and Christian groups were also found, which suggests that people sometimes used these chambers for worship or quiet gatherings. Reports from early excavations mention small markings on walls that might represent symbols or private prayers. The environment inside the caves played a major role in preserving what was left behind. The temperature stayed steady throughout the year, and the thick stone protected objects from heat, moisture, and exposure. Parchment and ink that would have decayed in ordinary homes could last far longer inside these sheltered spaces. Discoveries made in areas like Qumran support this idea, since many ancient texts survived only because they were placed in similar conditions. When all these elements come together, it becomes clear why people trusted these caves with their most sensitive belongings. They were not just shelters. They were vaults carved into the mountains, capable of guarding items that people could not risk keeping in plain sight. In recent years, Mount Arbel had drawn the attention of archaeologists who were studying how first-century communities responded to Roman pressure. According to project records, a university-funded team led by Dr. Miriam Halevi began a survey of the cave network to document items left behind by families who once hid there.
They're believed to have been there since the early days of Christianity. Imtiaz Tayyab reports on the material and the amazing story it tells.
The team focused on deeper chambers because earlier studies suggested that people often placed their most sensitive belongings far from the entrance. This survey was not intended to find anything extraordinary. It was part of a routine project to map cultural activity in the region and recover small artifacts from daily life. Out of all the chambers in Mount Arbel, one hidden chamber, left untouched far longer than anyone expected, held something no one saw coming: the sealed box beneath the stonefall. When the excavation team entered the deeper end of the chamber, they expected more pottery fragments and tools. They did not expect to see a mound of tightly packed stones that looked different from the natural collapse around it. According to excavation reports, the team noticed that this particular pile of debris had settled in a compact way, which suggested that something solid lay beneath it. The workers cleared the stones slowly, layer by layer, until the smooth surface of a limestone object began to appear. It took several hours before the team uncovered the full shape of a small box carved from a single block of stone.
We found many significant artifacts and items that belong to the state of Israel.
From the first glance, the box appeared out of place. Archaeologists who studied the area said they had never seen an object of that size or shape in surrounding chambers. The surface showed marks that looked like deliberate toolwork. These marks were not decorative. They were practical and clean, as if the maker focused entirely on accuracy. Some specialists later suggested that this type of craftsmanship often indicated that the box served a personal or sensitive purpose. Its placement under the rock slide suggested that it had been hidden before the collapse, not placed there by chance. The lid of the box was sealed with hardened wax. The wax did not cover the entire surface but formed a visible ring around the meeting point of the lid and the body. This detail surprised researchers. Wax sealing was not common for storing everyday items in a cave. It was usually used to protect something that needed to stay untouched. According to some historians, wax was often used to secure letters or personal documents, which added to the growing suspicion that the box held something more significant than pottery shards. Soil tests were carried out around the exterior of the box. These tests placed the object within the early Roman period. This was the same era when many families fled into the caves during political unrest. The matching time frame raised even more questions. If someone hid this box during that era, then the contents could offer a rare look into a moment of crisis. Lifting the lid demanded absolute precision. The stone was brittle from age, and even the slightest pressure could have shattered it. The team worked slowly, using soft brushes to clear the edges and support clamps to keep the lid steady. No one spoke. Every tiny noise in the chamber made them tense because they knew a single mistake could destroy whatever was inside.
One could always assume that they read the words of the prophets here and found some sort of a consolation during their troubled time.
After several careful attempts, the lid shifted. It opened without cracking, and the entire team froze. Lying inside the box was a tightly rolled piece of ancient writing, wrapped in fragile fibers. According to several researchers, finding written material preserved this well inside such a hidden container was nearly unheard of in this region. Silence filled the chamber as the team stared at the rolled piece of ancient writing. No one expected something so delicate to survive inside a sealed stone box. The discovery changed the atmosphere immediately. What had started as a routine excavation was no longer routine. It became an urgent question of what kind of message had been hidden so carefully and why someone believed it needed protection for so many centuries. The artifact raised questions immediately, especially one that no one in the chamber could ignore. Why would someone go to such lengths to hide a simple piece of writing so deep inside the mountain? Answering that question required careful study of the fragile scroll inside, the letter that should not have survived. When the ancient writing was lifted out of the box, everyone in the room realized they were holding something that should not have survived this long. The linen wrapping around it had nearly dissolved. It crumbled at the slightest touch, which suggested, according to textile specialists, that it came from the 1st century. The fabric was fragile, but the writing inside had endured. This alone caused surprise because very few documents from this period remain intact. Once the linen was carefully removed, the team examined the surface. The ink had faded into a brown tint, which is common in ink made from burned material that has aged for many centuries. Some parts were darker, while others were barely visible. The simple nature of the ink also suggested that whoever wrote the letter used whatever resources were available, which pointed to personal correspondence rather than official documentation. Researchers then used infrared lighting to see what the naked eye could not. As the letters became clear, the team realized they were not looking at structured teaching or legal text. The lines were short and uneven. There were pauses where the writer seemed to hesitate. According to early translators, the text did not follow the organized form used by trained scribes. Instead, the writing moved in a way that felt spontaneous. It looked as if someone wrote during a moment of emotional weight rather than calm preparation. The letter used conversational Aramaic, which was the everyday language spoken throughout Galilee. This distinction is important because formal religious or political writings were often recorded in Greek or Hebrew. The choice of Aramaic made the letter feel direct and human, as if someone was speaking to a familiar person rather than delivering instruction. Another detail caught the attention of the experts. There were no signs of religious structure, no verses, no parallel phrasing, nothing that suggested it belonged in a synagogue or any early organized group. According to some scholars, this absence might indicate that the writer did not intend for anyone outside a small circle to ever read these words. Yet one simple detail at the top of the writing pushed specialists into deeper investigation. A brother's name, written in the shadows. When translators reached the beginning of the letter, everything changed. The writing opened with a clear and direct greeting, "To my brother." There were no other names attached to it, but this single line immediately drew the attention of the entire research team. According to several scholars who reviewed the text, this type of address was uncommon in personal letters from the region unless the writer shared a close bond with the recipient. The simplicity of the greeting made it feel intimate, and it suggested that the writer believed the recipient would recognize the message without further identification. The moment the greeting was translated, discussions began about who this brother might be. Some researchers proposed that it could refer to a spiritual brother, which was a common way to address members of close religious groups. Others believed it pointed to a biological brother. As debate continued, one name emerged as the strongest candidate. Historical accounts consistently describe James the Just as a central figure in early Jerusalem. He was known for his discipline, devotion, and leadership. Many early writers portrayed him as someone who inspired trust and commanded respect from both followers and critics. Because of this, he became the primary focus of speculation. James played an important role during a period marked by tension and rapid growth among early believers. Several ancient sources noted that he served as a steady voice when other leaders traveled or faced challenges. He guided the Jerusalem community and acted as a bridge between different groups who often disagreed. This made him a significant figure in the first generation of believers, and it also meant that he carried responsibilities that placed him under constant strain. Some historians have pointed out that there were moments of misunderstanding between James and Jesus. These accounts describe disagreements over family expectations, public actions, and the growing attention surrounding Jesus' activities. According to these writings, their relationship carried moments of confusion and emotional weight. When early translators read the tone of the letter, they felt echoes of that same tension. The words in the writing carried a quiet pressure, as if the writer was speaking to someone who knew him well, but did not always understand him. The emotional quality of the greeting made the researchers pause. If the letter was truly directed at James the Just, then the identity of the writer became an even more serious question. Scholars understood the significance of such a correspondence. There are no known private letters between these two figures, and the existence of one would be unprecedented. It would give historians a rare look into the personal world behind two of the most influential names in early history. The greeting alone did not confirm anything, but it introduced a possibility that no one on the team wanted to dismiss lightly. Every detail in the text from that point forward had to be examined with greater care, because a message addressed to James could only come from someone who carried enormous personal importance. As translators moved deeper into the content, certain lines carried a familiarity that could not be ignored. The words that turn back time. The translators gathered around the writing with a level of caution they had not shown before. They knew this section would determine the true significance of the discovery. The ink was uneven. Some areas were dark and readable, while others were faded to the point of disappearing. Every fragment had to be checked repeatedly. According to several people who were present, the moment the first full sentences became visible, the room went silent. The message carried a voice that sounded worn, pressured, and unmistakably human. One of the first lines described truth as something that isolates the person who carries it. The writer did not treat truth as something triumphant. Instead, he described it as a responsibility that created distance between himself and the people around him. This caught researchers off guard because it did not match formal teachings or common religious writings from the period. It sounded like someone admitting the personal cost of what he believed. Several scholars noted that the sentence read as if the writer was speaking to someone familiar with his struggles and needed to understand why he often felt alone. Another section of the letter spoke about days filled with sorrow and uncertainty. The writer acknowledged the weight of these days but said that hope still remained. This hope was not presented dramatically. It was described in simple terms, and that simplicity made it feel sincere. Experts later pointed out that this mix of sorrow and steady hope appears in multiple accounts from the final period of Jesus' life. They noted that historical sources often describe him trying to continue his work while carrying emotional pressure and growing concern from his followers. The line that created the strongest reaction from the group asked for forgiveness for people who used the writer's name without understanding what he stood for. This single request shocked the translators because it suggested that the writer already knew misunderstandings were forming around him. Instead of anger, he responded with patience. He asked for compassion. According to several scholars, the tone matched the type of responses that were recorded from Jesus, who often urged forgiveness toward those who acted without knowledge. The language used throughout the letter reinforced these impressions. The expressions matched known Galilean speech patterns. Linguists pointed out that the writing felt consistent with the everyday Aramaic spoken in 1st century Galilee. This was significant because it showed the writer understood the casual and emotional style of communication common in that region. It strengthened the idea that the letter came from someone deeply familiar with the environment and culture of that time. The emotional conflict described in the text also aligned with pressures recorded during Jesus' ministry. Some historians suggested that the writer was describing the difficulty of guiding people who misunderstood him while trying to stay focused on his purpose. The letter did not attempt to teach doctrine or share public instruction. It read like a private explanation shared with someone trusted. The personal tone made the message feel like a confession rather than teaching. According to early experts who reviewed the translated lines, the voice in the letter sounded consistent with someone who lived through the events recorded in early Christian history. This did not provide proof of identity, but it opened a possibility that left the entire team unsettled. For many of them, it was the first time they had seen any document from this period express emotion with such directness. As the translators continued their work, the letter felt less like an artifact and more like a preserved moment that the writer never intended for the public. Each sentence suggested that he feared his words could be misunderstood, which might explain why the message was hidden so carefully. The team could not ignore how closely the tone matched the figure at the center of early Christian accounts. What unsettled experts the most was not a single sentence, but the overall tone. According to several historians, the letter revealed a private side of Jesus that does not appear in Scripture or early writings. The mix of sorrow, responsibility, and forgiveness suggested that his personal reflections were far heavier than previously recorded. The message could reshape how scholars understand his final years, the misunderstandings surrounding his work, and the emotional cost of his mission. For many experts, this possibility alone was enough to say that the discovery could change the foundation of historical study. Once the translation circulated, the reactions that followed showed how disruptive this discovery could be. The shockwave across the world. Museums and universities moved quickly to protect the object and to control how it would be studied. Access to the writing was limited to a small team of specialists, and every handling was logged to protect the fragile material. According to officials involved, multiple laboratories requested permission to run independent tests, which created pressure to decide which analyses could be done without harming the writing. Internal meetings became tense as experts argued over the order of tests. Some insisted on material dating first. Others pushed for ink analysis and microscopic fiber work. Several scientists warned that any single test carried small but real risks, and everyone involved understood that a mistake might erase information that could never be recovered. These debates revealed how high the stakes were for institutions charged with both preserving the object and seeking reliable answers. Religious bodies responded with urgency and caution for different reasons. Some leaders called for restraint and asked their communities to await the scientific results. Other leaders issued immediate statements, saying that the letter's human tone and calls for forgiveness felt familiar and meaningful. Still, other groups warned against rushing to link the writing to any particular historical figure and urged pastoral care to prevent confusion among believers. According to statements released by several councils, the discovery touched personal faith for millions and therefore required careful handling. Religious organizations also communicated directly with museums and universities to request transparency and sensitivity while tests proceeded. Both sides recognized that the outcome would affect not only scholarship, but also how many people understand their faith. If you enjoyed watching the video, kindly like and subscribe.